Hey guys, what's up? I'll just start in a few seconds, okay? Okay, I suppose I can start now. Wait, okay. Okay, hey guys, my name is Ashutosh and welcome to Getting Started with React. In this webinar, we're going to be going over the core concepts of React and how to implement them. Now, you can use whatever I'm going to teach you in this webinar to build a web, mobile, and even desktop applications. Of course, some things are going to be different in all the platforms, but the main concepts of React stay the same. In this webinar, however, for the ease of understanding, we're going to be discussing the web way of React. Now, there's a few prerequisites you need to have before you go on with this course. And even though I've written them here, even if you don't really know Node.js and NPM, you'll still be fine. You can still understand the main concepts of React. You won't really have an issue. But you need to know a little bit of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's for sure. Okay. Yeah. So let's just discuss why we even want to learn React, okay? So first of all, Java, like what is React? Okay, React is a JavaScript library. Yeah, it's not a framework, and it's created by Facebook. It is not a framework, and why do I mention that so specifically? Is that people tend to confuse libraries from frameworks for some reason, and you need to understand the major difference between a library and a framework. Is that a library is something that gives you freedom to do whatever you want. Basically, it gives you the freedom to decide what you're doing. But a framework is going to guide you and is going to tell you what to do, you could say. Not exactly, but like framework is like a set of rules that you have to follow to do something, you could say. But a library gives you, you know, freedom to do it. Okay, I already said that. Anyway, continue. It revolves around the concept of virtual DOM. Now, the virtual DOM isn't something that React created itself, like Facebook created, but like it's been out there for a while now, and it's a very cool thing. We'll get deeper into virtual DOM in a bit. I'll explain it in a better way. Also, this makes creating single-page web applications a lot easier. Now, what do I mean by a single-page web application? Now, you've all seen HTML, CSS. We learned it in 10th and 8th standard. I don't know, like in school, we learned HTML and CSS. Everyone's grandmas knows like HTML and CSS at this point. So, what's React, and how is it different than any other thing that we do? So the thing with React is that it'll only work on a single HTML file, and you'll see that in a bit. And what happens is like we change everything that happens on the page using JavaScript. So it is a single page application, but we're like if you show a guy who doesn't know it's made using React, he or she couldn't tell that it's a single page application. Okay. The next thing. Now, why React? Like, okay, let's get into why React, and it's really important. Before we even get into why React, let's just talk about why JavaScript, okay? Now, as some of you may something called Dino came out, and something called Node.js suddenly became obsolete. Well, not really. Node.js isn't obsolete, and it's not going anywhere for a long time. But that just explains how JavaScript works. That just explains how the background of JavaScript is, like how fast something just kicks out of the market and new things come up, and like the old things are now obsolete, and if you're using them, you're a boomer or anything like that, something like that. Anyway, so one thing to take care about in JavaScript is that it's hard for some people to keep up, I guess, because things keep changing really rapidly. And like every year, there's something new out. Basically, there's if you know a little bit about ECMAScript, the ECMAScript International, basically ES6 and ES5 and ES7, ES 2015, 16, 17, 18. Like there's been a lot of changes throughout these years. And now, if you look at the first version of JavaScript and the current version of JavaScript, they are like absolutely different. Still have the same stuff, some of the same stuff, but like a lot of things have changed. Now, the thing is, JavaScript also has a lot of bugs. So not a lot of bugs. There's some bugs. I might even get into some of them eventually. And people tend to not like JavaScript because of that. And there's a lot of hate around it, you could say. And you'll always hear that, like you may have even seen the post by C for projects itself that said, we can never tell what this refers to. And honestly, sometimes even I can't tell that. There's no issues in that, I guess. But the essence of this is something also we'll get into because we're going to use that a lot in this webinar. Okay, so let's get into the why React thing. First of all, React is used by some of the major companies. It was made by Facebook, so it's used by Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, like the web version of WhatsApp. And Instagram uses React Native, which is basically an app development library, you could say, a framework, which is made using JavaScript. We're basically making apps using JavaScript. Then there's Reddit, which uses React, is Pinterest, Dropbox, Netflix, pretty cool stuff, I guess. Okay, wait. Why is this buffering? Give me a second. Small issue, I suppose. My PPT is messed up. Anyway, I guess we'll work without that. Okay, so let's discuss the. Okay. So the cool thing about that, it'll update the actual DOM without refreshing the page. That's the essence. Okay, and in essence, React creates a layer between the real DOM and that's a typo. Never mind that. And the virtual DOM and React basically. So I'll just go to sketchpad.io, and I'll have to show you a small example of what I'm going to be doing. If this loads, that is. My internet's really messed up right now for some reason. Okay. Oh yeah, there you go. Finally. Okay, so I'll just create it right now. I thought I had it here, but never mind that. So let's assume this is your real DOM, okay? Well, let me just. That's your real DOM. And then let's say any output that we give, okay? I'm not going to write it myself. That's any output that the React basically sends, any JavaScript output that comes out. So in a normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript application, in a normal web application, what the flow is something like, yikes, the flow is something like this. The output goes to the real DOM, someone interacts with the output real DOM, and the, let's say, input output, I guess. Okay, and someone gives an input here, and we get the input back here. Okay, so that's like basically the flow in the front end. There's a lot in the back end going on. We're not going to talk about that right now, but that's how it goes. So, but what happens in a what happens in a React application is that this just goes away, okay? And we have another little flow here, which is like this, which is called the virtual DOM. My typing is really bad with my mouse. Anyway, so what happens now is any output that comes out of React or any application that we're using will first go to the virtual DOM. Now, what the virtual DOM will do is it'll have an instance of of the DOM of that in itself, okay, and it'll compare what happens after I put in the after I put the output in the real DOM and the current version of real DOM. If anything has changed, it'll just put that instance over to the real DOM. Now you might think that this takes a long time, but you know the engineers at Facebook were pretty good at this, I guess. So they made something that was really fast. Anyway, so yeah, basically that's about it. So what the virtual DOM here does is from start of the page to the bottom of the page, they'll check everything. If anything has changed, they'll update it basically. Also, there's one small thing you need to know. You know what? We'll get into that later. Never mind. Okay, good. Let's get back to our PPT. So we're going to be discussing a lot of things, and 5 of those things, I suppose, are. Okay. One of them, one of the first is components. So components let you split the UI into independent reusable pieces and think about each piece in isolation. So what this means is what this means is like in HTML normal web application you'll have one component, right? One page. One page is a whole component, you could say, or you could split it into different components. You do it by giving them different tags called main, header, or footer, or something like that. Now what happens in React is every single thing that you work with is can be made into a different component. Like even a single p tag, like a single paragraph, single like text can be made into a different component and send it as a like a different component. Okay, and what this makes easier is like if you're working on really big applications, which by the way is the proper use of React. If you're trying to build a brand website, which is like the whole purpose of it is to look pretty and attract users to your website, like or to your brand. I think React is not the thing to use. React is something that you use when you want a whole lot of functionality in your app. But it's not like that you can't make a looking application with React, but it would be a lot easier, I would say, if you just use normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or maybe if you use a library like Svelte or something. So let's get into the next thing. Also, if you have any doubts on the way, you can always ask me. What's your personal opinion on JS? Shubhankar asks. Do you like it? I like JS. There's no issue with it for me, but yeah, there's some bugs, and I hope they'll be fixed in the future. But even if they aren't, that's okay, I guess. Working, and JS is not going anywhere for a long time now, so that's cool, I guess. Props stand for properties, which are arbitrary inputs to a component, where a component is okay. We already discussed component. Anyway, so the props are, you could say, something like a parameter and a function. Okay, something like that. Not exactly like that, but anyway. So how props work is like if you understood components, there's very simple thing that you need to understand is that any component can have another component inside it. Okay, so that splits them into a parent-child component thing, you could say. So if there's a parent component and you put a child component in it, and let's say you have some data in the parent component. So if you want to put the data from the parent component in the child component, you will pass that data as props to the child component. Okay, so that's how props work. And that data isn't necessarily any variable. Like it could be any data type from JavaScript, but it also could be a function, like any like a callback function or something like that. Just like functions, you could say. Okay, but you can never pass props from the child to the parent. Okay. Then there's the state. Okay, the state is an instance of React component class, can be defined as a object or set of object properties that control behavior of the component. So you remember I discussed that thing Sketchpad. It's like React compares the real DOM and the instance of the real DOM with the changed values. So when does the virtual DOM know that I have to compare things? And that's what's controlled by the state variable. So what happens? Oh, yikes. Okay. So what happens is, if someone changes the state variable in any way, what happens is, if someone changes the state variable in any way, React will tell the virtual DOM basically to change, like to update the page, and then the virtual DOM will check if after changing the state anything has changed or not, or something like that. Okay, well, it works like that. Again, if you have any doubts, you can just ping me in the chat. I'm looking at it constantly. Then there's life cycles, and each component in React has a life cycle which you can monitor and manipulate during its three main phases. The three main phases are mounting, updating, and unmounting. Now, in a previous webinar I took on React, I set this thing for last, but I suppose I can like just get onto it right now. You know what? Never mind. I think I need to understand a lot of other things before we go into that. Okay. So updating, mounting, and unmounting. So these things have a lot to do with the async nature of JavaScript, you could say. And to understand the async nature of JavaScript, I have put a link in the description. I hope and I can tell you a little bit about it, I guess. So what happens in an async? Now you know JavaScript is a single-threaded language. Okay? And a single-threaded language means that it can only work with one process at a time. But you would think that how is that possible? Like that would make the application really slow, right? That's not really a good thing. But JavaScript tackles that with a thing called async approach. Okay. You know what? I should open the sketchpad for this too. Yeah. So let me just draw it again. So what happens in a async, I'm just going to try to explain it in the simplest way possible, but this actually has a lot to do with heaps and stacks, if you know about them. But I understand not many people here, not all of the people here are familiar with data structures and algorithms, so I'm just going to try to explain it in a very simple way. Let's assume 3 Chrome web browser, any web browser for that matter. So what happens is, in a stack basically, processes are stacked one upon the another, okay? Like this is process 1, this is process 2, process 3, process 4, okay? And in this case, process 4 came first, then 3, then 2, then 1. That's how stacks work, right? Like you put things on top basically, and you also remove things from top. So what happens is, as soon as processes are placed on top of each other, they're gonna be, oh, it's a queue actually, you could say. Anyway, so what happens is, let's say the fourth process came first, okay? This fourth process came first. And if it's a normal process, like a normal function, like addition, subtraction, or like anything, like, or even a loop for that matter, a for loop or a while loop, it'll just get executed here. But let's say you're doing something called a set timeout. Type it out, a set timeout. Now, a set timeout in JavaScript is something that takes a while to do. Okay, you set a timeout for like let's say 3 seconds, and that function that you put inside set timeout is going to be executed after 3 seconds. So what happens is something like this for 3 seconds will block any other processes that come after it. Let's say fourth is going to be executed first, and then 3, 2, 1 are going to be blocked for 3 seconds, and let's set. So that's not something a single-threaded language should do. So what this does is, this is a thing called Web API in a Chrome V8 engine. So this Web API, this process is passed to the Web API, okay, and then JavaScript basically waits for this to finish, and then this comes here, which is called the event queue, basically you could say event queue, I think. Now what event queue will do, it'll wait for these processes to finish. Let's say there's 3 processes that came over from here, and these processes will come over here and wait for their position after all these other processes are finished. So let's say you put a set timeout for 3 seconds here, then that set timeout is going to go here directly, okay? And after that, it's going to like execute for 3 seconds, and until these 3 processes won't wait for that set timeout at all, Okay, and as soon as the 3 seconds are over, the result of this function will come here. And as soon as all three these as soon as it finds that there's no other process going on this in this event loop. By the way, this whole thing is called an event loop. This is how JavaScript works in the async stuff. Okay. This when it sees there's no 1 2 3 left, they're all executed and the result is out. The result of this will finally go in the the stack. So that's how the async thing works in JavaScript. And life cycles are a part of that, I could say. So when component is about to mount or is mounting, that's the mounting stage. Is already mounted, that's the mounting stage. And when the component updates or is going to update or has already updated, that's the updating stage. And when the component is going to unmount, that means the component is not going to be shown anymore. That's the unmounting stage. And then we'll also discuss conditional rendering, which means that we'll render if something, then if this, then render that, else render something else. The class. Get into our project. Okay, let's start with the real D. Let me just put VS Code on top so you can see it. I hope you can see it now. Yes, you can. Okay, so if you have VS Code, I'm just gonna ask you to press the left control key and the vary key below escape. And then you will open your terminal. Let me just increase the size a little bit so you can see better. And in this, in whatever your folder where you work in, you can go to that folder and run npx create react app. Oh wait, that's not right. Create react app, and let's just name it new to-do list. And that's gonna work for a while and finally create something. You can see it's going to do a lot of stuff to finally, and it's done, I think. No, okay, it's resolving packages. Just give it a while and it'll be done in no time. This is how long the first build usually takes. It's not going to take that long every time we run it. Also, I think I should say this time, is if you're working with React, there's some extensions you need to have. Is one of them is deprecated anyway. There's Babel JavaScript extension and ES7 React Redux GraphQL simple extensions by DSZ Nature. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but there's a few of these like ESLint. That's really important. Of these extensions you should have if you're working with React. Okay. I suppose we are done and we named it new to-do list, I suppose. So we can go to that folder. It creates its own folder. That's not it. And we go to that and we can do a code doc. Oh wait, I'll just open it here. Yeah. So you can see on the left, that we've been given with a few folders. This is the new to-do list folder. And we've been giving it a few starters. One of them is yarn lock. Now, by the way, need I mention that you should have yarn or npm installed by default, and definitely have node installed by default, because React can't work without node. And Okay, so you'll see a yarn log file with a lot. It's huge. Let's say how many lines? 10,854 lines of version locking. So what happens is, as I said before, JavaScript is a ever-growing language, so the version's changing every day, right? And let's say this is Babel, by the way. Babel is something that makes the JavaScript code backward compatible, because not all browsers can understand all the latest version of JavaScript. So Babel basically compiles the JavaScript that we write and makes it compatible with every single browser out there. So 6, I think. I'm not even sure what it doesn't work on, but like anyway. Okay. It's 7.8.3, but let's say like 3 months from now, this becomes 7.8.4 or something, 7.9 are actually version numbers. But if it becomes something like that, then the application is going to break, but because we're not following the latest, guidelines of Babel or JavaScript or anything like that, you know. So what package yarn log or package log.json is what the other thing you'd have if you're using Node, npm, is that it logs the versions, so you can work with this version for throughout this whole project. And yeah, that's about it, I guess. And also it maintains the security of the package that you're using. So this is registered on yarnpackage.com. Like, so, you should, like, you're using someone else's code at this point to do stuff. This is not something I've written. This is not something anyone, writes. This is something that we take yarn or npm. So as long as you're using someone else's code, you need to have a certain level of trust on them, I guess. And like yarn or npm, provides that kind of trust, I guess you could say. So they also maintain this integrity, that this is from a real source, you could say, something like that. Also, we have a file called package.json, which automatically gives the name and gives a new version, because it's 0.01 list. It's our first time we're making it, so it gives it a version. And there's a few dependencies that come right off the bat. One of them is dependencies. You can ignore these. The testing libraries. It's for something. If you get deeper into React, you might want to test if you're building for a corporate thing or like a big project or something like that. Anyway, so React DOM, and React scripts. These are the three things which are really important. React and React DOM is basically that works with the React. React scripts, it's something that works with the hot reloading of React, you could say. And it's really important. We'll get to that. What hot reloading and everything is, we'll get to that. And React DOM and React scripts, these are two dependencies that React need to have to work. And, React needs React to work. Anyway, so we can get to the SRC. The SRC file is where all files will land, and the public file is where the index.html file is. Now this is the thing I'm talking about. There's only one HTML file, and everything else that we're going to work is basically JavaScript. But it's also going to work with something like HTML inside JavaScript, which is called JSX. We'll get to that later. And this index.html has one div or with the ID root, okay? And in this ID root, once you go to index.js and this will look for that ID root, document.getElement by ID. Pretty self-explanatory if you don't know JavaScript. Like inside the document, it will search for any element that has the ID root, okay? And in a public file, index.html, we have the ID root right here, okay? And it will React DOM.render. So what this thing does is anything that inside it, any component, this is how components are written, by the way, it will render inside the root, okay? Then we go to app.js, and index.js, you can see it's importing app from app.app, and React by default understands that you mean app.js, so you need not write it because we're working on the JS config. If you were supposedly working with TypeScript, which is you could say a better version of JavaScript. It's not really a better version of JavaScript. It's like a super. My stream just died. Let me check. Okay, in any case. So then there's this app.js file, and in this you can see there's a simple functional component, and you can see it's a function app returns an HTML kind of thing. It looks like HTML, but isn't really HTML. It it has class name instead of class. If you've ever worked with HTML, like you'll know that that's not how it works. But and it's importing CSS. That's just JavaScript. Okay, you know it's not really exactly rel no open no ever or I don't know. I don't think I've ever worked with that normal HTML. But anyway, so let's just remove this and I'll explain a class based component. That was a functional based component, and then we'll get to the HTML looking thing. Okay, and we'll simply first import React from React. Can name it capital R, I think. I'm not sure. We name it capital R? Yeah, we name it capital R. Okay. And then we'll go export default class app extend react dot component. Yeah. So what does this line mean? In a normal JavaScript class, you could simply say class app, and that works with the class app. Okay. What export default class app extends React component means? First of all, export default means that it's going to export this class. Okay, so we can import it here. As simple as that. And class app extends React.component means that it's going to use the component feature that React offers to extend this class and use it's a type of inheritance, you could say. When inheriting the functions that React component has to offer, you could say. Okay. In this, we can simply call the render function. The render function will render anything after the state changes. And inside, we can return a basic HTML kind of thing. Okay. How do we test this? How do we know if our app is even working, right? What we'll simply do is called yarn start in our command line. Well, not really yarn start. Like yarn start for me, but if you're using npm and do not have yarn, it will do the same thing. And we can press yarn start and it will start our app. And to see the app, I'll have to do one thing. Hopefully this works. Let me just put it in the proper position. And I suppose that looks good. Okay. So you can see that I have my I have my hello world right here, written right here. So you know it's working because I can show hello world that I'm writing here. And let's talk about the kind of application we're going to be making. It's going to be a simple to-do list app with the basic, add and delete and update and destroy functions. Not update, we'll just, let update go for now. Like we can add and delete stuff, and I'll show you how React updates things and how you can even implement this in a huge, big. I'll show you one website that I made using React and how nothing reloads in it until I do something, which needs it to be reloaded. So let's start JSX. So this isn't really actually HTML. This looks like HTML, I know, but this isn't really HTML. It's actually JSX. The JSX is something. It's a lot like HTML, but it's actually made using XML, you could say, I think. Anyway, so this is something that JavaScript can understand. JavaScript can't really just simply understand basic HTML, okay? So in this, the only major difference that you need to know are that classes are named as class names. And in JSX, let's just give it a class name of parent. And in you can't really have, you need to enclose everything in a tag, in a parent tag. So you can't really have something like this. This will cause an error. This simply causing error, parsing error. It just in JSS element must be wrapped in enclosing tag. Okay. And you can use something like JSX React fragment. So this doesn't really add anything to the nodes, and it will still you know give us a good old component. Give me a second. Okay, so let's discuss the state variable as soon as possible. Now we have the state variable, and it's pretty much a JavaScript object. Okay, we can simply put it as let's say pets, and we can give it a value of dogs. And in here we can also in JSX you can just like implement any sort of JavaScript with these curly braces, yeah. And like anything you put inside it is treated as JavaScript. So it shows an error because that really isn't a valid keyword in JavaScript. And in this you can call this dot state dot pets, which basically means now this keyword. Where did this come from, right? Why are we using this? It doesn't know like it's in the same function, right? It's in the same class, so why doesn't it know that we're using state?